All right, welcome everyone. My name's Will McDonald. I'm going to be your host today, where we're joining you live to discuss the review of Australia's national medicines policy and what it means for Aussie men and their families impacted by prostate cancer. Now, I'm joined today by four experts whose combined career experience equals around 100 years of research brilliance and policy knowledge. It's quite amazing. Firstly, I am honoured to be joined by the Chief of Mission and Head of Research of Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia and President-elect of the Union for International Cancer Control, Professor Jeff Dunn AO. Jeff's work in cancer control spans 30 years. He's dedicated his career to the development of strategies that underpin cancer survival and improve awareness of the disease. He is a recognised world cancer leader and one of the world's chief proponents of research into the social and behavioural aspects of cancer, covering the continuum of research, prevention, early detection, supportive care and quality of life. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, to all our listeners and people watching, good to be here.
It's so great to have you here indeed. I'm also pleased to be joined by Troels Wolters, the Executive Medical Director of Amgen Australia. Troels' 21-year career history includes an international contribution to improve patient outcomes through scientific excellence and digitalisation, with broad industry experience drawn from his special academic interest in diabetes, endocrinology and hepatology. Welcome, Troels. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Will, and delighted to be here.
We're also joined by Troels' Amgen colleague, Ian Noble, the Director of Value Access and Policy, and the driving force behind Amgen's submission in response to the National Medicines Policy Review. Ian is a trained health economist with 25 years of experience working in market roles in traditional pharmaceutical companies, biotechnology companies, and in consultancy roles in the UK, Switzerland, and Australia. Ian is also a former member of Australia's Medical Services Advisory Committee, one of the most influential committees working in the national arena that we are debating today. Ian, thank you for being here too.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Last, but by no means least, we're joined by the PCFA's Director of Nursing Programs, Adjunct Professor Sally Sara. With over 30 years of nursing experience behind her, Sally leads a team of nearly 100 terrific PCFA prostate cancer specialist nurses around the country. She holds a Master's of Clinical Nursing, is currently completing her PhD, and is recognised as one of the leading experts on specialist nursing care for men with prostate cancer. Sally Sara from my hometown, Adelaide, thank you for being here with us on the webinar.
Thanks, Will. It's lovely to be here.
Just quickly, everyone who's joined us today for this special webinar talking about the developments in medicine and access to it. Tell you a bit about me. I'm a presenter for 9 News in Adelaide, but some of you may know that my life has been impacted by prostate cancer. I was diagnosed with a really pretty aggressive form of prostate cancer. I was diagnosed in July 2020. I was only 42 years old, so just almost 2 years. Since then, I've had 6 rounds of chemo, 20 rounds of radiotherapy, ongoing hormone therapy, all pretty unpleasant, but happily, I'm doing pretty well now. So before my diagnosis, I didn't really know that my father's risk of prostate cancer. He was diagnosed at 75. I didn't know that his diagnosis really meant a lot to me in terms of my risk of the disease. And so I guess, like so many men in this situation, I was caught off guard. But I am determined to stay positive and strong and push the agenda to make sure that we all get the best outcomes that we possibly can. And that's why I'm so privileged and honoured to be involved in things like this. And I do regularly turn to experts for advice and guidance too. In my own experience and closely watching and listening, as I said, I know there are great things going on in medical research in trying to help men like me live for as long as possible. And I've learned, though, that accessing new medicines and treatments is not always the easiest thing for those dealing with prostate cancer. So to begin today's panel discussion, I will hand over to Ian Noble to tell us more about Australia's national medicines policy and the current review. Ian.
Thanks, Will, and thanks for your story as well. Yeah, look, why do we have a national medicines policy? So I'll go a little bit into the background and of how it was created in the first place and why it was created. I'll also talk about why it's been re-examined and refreshed. And also, I want to try and get across the point of why we talk above the medicine level on things that help frame the environment in which we're working in. So Amgen is quite active in talking about areas that we don't necessarily have products in, but we want to engage in the environment shaping because we know that we've all got to work and operate within the environment. And if there's something broken within the environment, we've got to fix it. And we'll all be better off at the end of the day. And the National Medicines Policy was put together in the year 2000, so it's 22 years old now. But it came about, it was inspired by a discussion in 1996. And it was an agreement between the Council of Australian Governments that we need to have some sort of overarching umbrella approach to talking about medicines and policy. And remember, in Australia, we've got quite a fragmented health system. So we've got the federal government. They fund things at the federal level, the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. And that's where we get all our reimbursed drugs that we use, and it's a universal system. We've got the MBS, and they fund procedures and your visits to the GP. Then you've got private health insurance, and then you've got the state in control of public hospitals. So quite a fragmented system that we work in. It's not like in the UK where you've got a national health system and it's one big employer. So it's important to have an overarching policy that explains the ethos. It's a bit like the tone from the top of how we should all operate together, how all the partners and stakeholders should operate together and work together to produce the best system for health outcomes for people. So that's my plug for why we have a national medicines policy. I also want to just take my hat off to PCFA because I don't see patient organisations getting into the broader level debate that often. And I think it's really important that as the industry has a voice in terms of shaping the environment, I think patient organisations and consumer organisations should have a voice as well at that shaping level, and clinicians and healthcare professionals. So I'm really pleased to be here to kick off this series. And I know there's going to be discussions throughout the year, and I just totally and utterly encourage you to get involved, etc. So back to the National Medicines Policy. And Will said he'd stop me if I get into jargon or if I ramble on a little bit more. So forgive me, I have got a tendency for that. It's 22 years old. It really focused in on three areas. It had three objectives. And one was timely access to medicines that Australians need at a cost individuals and community can afford. So that's to do with the PBS. Medicines meeting appropriate standards of quality, safety, and efficacy. That's to do with the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and everyone will have heard about the TGA through the COVID crisis. Are drugs coming through the TGA? They work out whether something's safe to use in Australia. The third one was about the quality use of medicines, and the fourth objective was about having and maintaining a responsible and viable pharmaceutical industry. The original National Medicines Policy was only 7 pages long, pretty high level, and it didn't go into detail. So if you go to the slide before this, I want to talk about the redraft, the redraft of the National Medicines Policy. And this is your plan on a page for understanding it. But it's not actually that easy to understand. So I'll give you a tip for starters. This redraft started in October, where I think 156 organisations put submissions to the steering committee that was looking after this redraft. 122 of those submissions you can see on the website for the National Medicines Policy. And this medicines policy is 23 pages long. It's a lot more detailed. It's got an aim at the top. I'm not going to read it because it would come across as being quite jargonistic. It's got pillars, and those pillars, there's 4 of them. They're very similar to the original ones I've just explained, the original objectives. There's a little bit more in terms of timely access, in terms of they've brought the concept of equity in access. And in the 4th pillar, they don't talk about a sustainable and viable pharmaceutical industry. They talk about a responsive and sustainable pharmaceutical industry. They even mention somewhere in the report it should be vibrant or no, thriving as well. So they snuck that extra word in on page 19. Then you've got all these principles, and these are new. You've got person-centered, equity, partnership-based, accountability and transparency, shared responsibility, innovation, evidence-based and sustainability. And then you've got enablers. And these are meant to create a framework for how policy gets determined in the future. So for example, the industry and the Department of Health are going through a health technology assessment review, first review in 30 years. We'll get into the argy-bargy of what we think should change and what they think should change. But this national medicines policy provides us with a guiding light to help us when we get into the argy-bargy and we need a little bit of guidance. So this document is super important. Probably go on to the next slide. This is figure 2 in the document. And what this slide tells us, it shows the relationship between the partners. And it just shows you that there's a lot of partners at stake here. And the nice thing here is individuals, carers, families, and communities are at the center. So I'm just going to go on to now talk about some of my observations and some of the things I think needs to change, because this national policy hasn't finalized yet. And it's only been in review for 6 months. And I think a lot of stakeholders haven't had a good opportunity to understand it and be heard. So the overarching thing the industry is saying, and I think a number of other stakeholders saying, hey, let's not rush to complete this. And I think the department wants to complete it before the general election in May. Let's delay this a little bit longer so we can have more engagement, because it is actually quite jargonistic at the moment and it doesn't have a very clear vision. But some observations, I think it is a lot more patient focused now, which is very good. They've brought into the concept here equity, and they talk a lot about the importance of health literacy and being accessible for up to a whole range of people. So from a patient organization point of view, there's some good stuff in here. But as I've said, it's been pretty rushed. And I think what's lacking here is a vision, an overarching vision of what we want healthcare in Australia to be. Do we want to be in the top 5 OECD countries in the world in terms of timeliness, in terms of access, in terms of bringing new innovation in? And I can't tell you, it talks about transparency, responsiveness, equity, sustainability, accountability, yes, but what do we mean by that? There's no measurement in here, there's no request for measurement. So Trolls will talk in a little bit about timely access and how Australia is doing. But what is timely access? What is equity? We need more guidance in this report, I think. And the Amgen submission goes into a little bit of detail if anyone's interested about what's happening in certain other countries like France, the UK, and certainly it's been happening in Germany for some time now, that when a drug comes through the regulatory body, in our case it's the TGA, and it's a world-class system at TGA. Medicine should be available immediately for use by people, reimbursed. And we should deal with the argy-bargy of the reimbursement and who pays, you know, how much the Commonwealth pays. We should be doing that alongside that. It shouldn't be a barrier before patients get their medicines. So those are a few observations. I'll hand over to Troels to go into a bit more detail about some of the things on this slide.
Thanks, Ian. So I'll talk a little bit to the access gap. As Will also alluded to, access to medicines in Australia isn't always straightforward. And in a general sense, Australians often are waiting too long for new innovative medicines. Now, the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, or the PBS, is what makes medicines affordable to Australians. So in Australia, if a medicine isn't on the PBS, patients largely can't afford to use the medicine. And there is this important access gap in between the regulatory approval and the reimbursement of an innovative medicine on the PBS. So the gap between when a new medicine is being registered on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, in other words, as Ian also said, is being deemed safe and effective by the Australian government, and it being listed on the PBS on average is about 800 days. So that means that most Australians wait for more than 2 years for medicines that potentially may improve their health or even save their life. So we did an analysis of all the submissions that was made to the PBAC from 2010 to 2017, and found that for submissions that claim an advantage over another medicine, those claiming cost effectiveness, as you call it, and has an analysis behind it, the average gap was about 820 days. And we believe that this gap obviously is way too long for a patient to wait. You can imagine what happens in that gap. Adverse outcomes in the disease that you're battling, even patient die in that gap. Now, from a pure process perspective, the PBAC evaluation cycle is relatively fast when you compare ourselves here in Australia to other countries that we typically will compare ourselves with. Countries that feature a health technology assessment as a core component of their reimbursement system. So the PBAC operates on a 17-week cycle, accumulating in a decision to recommend or not recommend on the PBS. The process is submission driven, with the vast majority of these submissions being lodged by the company that markets the medicine in Australia. It is, however, extremely rare for a medicine to be listed on the PBS following just a single submission and evaluation cycle. So whilst the PBAC evaluation cycle is fast, comparatively, the time to PBS listing and therefore affordable access to the patients that need them is far from fast. So the current system does not serve Australians well, and we believe that it's the way the process is structured and incentivized that kind of gets in the way. Companies like Amgen will put submission to the PBAC, they review them, they come back and often say no. And we'll reiterate that process many times, dragging out the equitable access to innovative medicines for patients. Often it's a price-seeking exercise, and one of the big underpinning root causes to this, we think, are the valuation that the Department of Health and the PBAC puts on what typically is a main component or a main outcomes measure that we talk about, which is a life year saved or a quality adjusted life year saved. And that's a common metric that we use in a health technology assessment. And that number in Australia is relatively low. It sits around $28,000 with a 95% confidence interval ranging in between $20,000 and $37,000. Now, despite all that aside, if we compare ourselves to some of the other countries that use similar tools to evaluate innovative medicines. Many of these countries are starting to rethink their pricing and reimbursement policies with the explicit aim of improving both time to access for patients and also creating a more attractive environment for life sciences. So you heard some of those examples from Ian already. Germany has, for many years, been paving the way here. So essentially in Germany, once a new innovative medicine is registered by the European Medicines Agency, it becomes reimbursed in Germany as well. Now, the way they then do it is that following the reimbursement, that's when the negotiation process and the assessment of the medicine takes place in between the health technology assessment body in Germany and the company that's bringing the innovative medicine forward. That being also including the final price negotiations. And in Germany, it's an iterative process that takes place every 12 to 18 months based on available data and any new data that sits behind the innovation being brought forward. So it's not a static process, it's dynamic and iterative. Similarly, in France, they've committed to targeting a 15-day gap. So from a medicine is registered, they're targeting only 50 days in between that happening and reimbursement being in place in France. And in Britain, there's also been an announcement about the introduction of a suite of measures aimed at ensuring that a subset of the most innovative and breakthrough health technologies are funded within weeks of authorization. So it is possible to utilize the health technology assessment not as a way of creating a fourth hurdle for patients to get access to new medicines, but using it as a tool to ensure that value for money over the long run is brought through both to governments and the patients that are utilizing these medicines, informed by an iterative evidence-based assessment and price negotiation in between that government and the company that's bringing forward the medicine. Now, that was the access gap. There's some other topics that when you talk about access gaps that would be worth talking about. I'm not going to go through it in any great detail here, but there's the whole clinical trial environment as well, whereby many patients in need get access to innovative medicines. That system works relatively well here in Australia. And we have many of our, in particular, cancer patients getting access to new medicines through that system. But it does as well bring with it some inequities that's worth discussing as well. There's a whole regulatory process that the TGA is in charge of. And whilst the TGA in recent years has tried to optimize that process, there's still some issues with it and ways of optimizing that process. That's another piece of discussion worth having. And then there's the whole issue of combination therapies, in particular when they sit, the innovative medicines that you're wanting to combine sit in different companies, and how you can process those through the current PBAC evaluation system, and which are the comparators that companies should use. And then lastly, there's the whole companion diagnostics aspects of it, diagnostic tools that you have to have in place to be able to utilize the innovative medicine being brought through. I'm not going to go through any of the latter five elements in any great detail because time doesn't allow us to, but these are also discussions worth having when we talk access to medicine. But I might hand back to Will at this point.
Thank you so much, Troels and Ian, for taking us through what is going on. There was no jargon there, I'm pretty sure. I was across it, and I'm not a doctor, so. But it is fascinating to see all of the different components and parts and how it plays. And the idea, Ian, you were talking about a vision. I mean, I think as a patient is so vitally important. And that slide that had the patient in the middle, I did think was a good start at the very least. Let's bring in Jeff Dunn. Jeff, can you tell us more about the PCFA's priorities for the National Medicines Policy Review? and also your response to the concerns that have been identified so far.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Will. And can I agree with you up front, Will, as I usually do in most things? Trolls and Ian, 10 out of 10 for a jargon-free presentation, fellows. So thanks for that. And while talking about that, can I also acknowledge with appreciation your recognition of the role the PCFA has played. And can I assure you that will continue to play in relation to medicine's policy. On a couple of levels, I mean, certainly we are active on individual cases with individual medicines, trying to bring forward listings or an access or do something about price. For sure and for certain, we do that. But in addition, we look to that broader picture, and I think it was Ian, you spoke about that as well, to making sure we have a presence in, in that contextual, strategic, thoughtful environment where people gather to consider how best to improve our healthcare. So, that is a role we wish to continue to play, and it's pleasing to hear that acknowledgement. And with regard to that, I suppose to start off with, the Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia is a member of the Union for International Cancer Control, which is the Geneva-based peak body for cancer organisations around the world. And universal health coverage right now is a key platform area for the UICC. And through its membership, Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia supports that. And I suppose what we would see with regard to a national medicines policy in Australia is something which does support the attainment of universal health coverage around the world, of course, but here in Australia as well. And, universal health coverage essentially is defined as a provision of quality care services for all people, where they need it. So all people, where and when they need those services without the imposition of financial or other hardships, for example, stigma. So when we look at UHC, certainly cost and access are important, but there are other, socio-cultural, political issues such as stigma to address as well. And I think when we think about a national medicines policy for Australia, let's try and put it in that broader context about what's happening globally, how we can learn from that, how we can benefit from that, and certainly how we can contribute to that as well. The three pillars of universal health coverage are about access to services, and as we've said, so they get services when and where they need them, and not only for those that can pay them. Financial risk protection. So, we've heard people talk about financial toxicity. Let's not make getting treated for cancer, for prostate cancer, for anything actually, something that puts us into debt, and quality of services. So if we're making them freely available, let's make sure they're the most efficient and effective that we've got going around. And I think, when you think about prostate cancer, these pillars of universal health coverage really speak to the sorts of things that Ian and Trolls were talking about, how we might look at a national medicines policy and in the context of prostate cancer are important. And by way of very quick reminder, there are challenges for people diagnosed with prostate cancer, which are yet to be fully addressed. There's a 24% higher risk of death for men diagnosed with prostate cancer in regional areas than in metropolitan areas. Today there's a 70% increased risk for men diagnosed with prostate cancer for suicide. 15% of men are diagnosed with stage 3 and 4 prostate cancer. If we could just get that diagnosis earlier, what a difference we would make. There's lack of affordable access to medicines and therapies. We've been talking about that. 1 in 5 patients with prostate cancer experience clinically significant levels of anxiety and distress. 40% of patients are experiencing reduced quality of life. I mean, the list goes on, and I don't want to trivialize any one of these points, but I can assure you that there are real issues out there. And in the broader context, we're hoping our national medicines policy can help us address some of these things. PCFA really has got 5 key headline priorities right now. The first of them has to be for us a review of the current screening guidelines for prostate cancer. These guidelines are due for review. Much has changed. Certainly, the evidence the technology, the medicines, the clinical practices that are around today are not the same ones that were around and available when these first set of guidelines were reviewed. And certainly attitudes, individual and community and societal have changed as well. We need to review these guidelines to make a difference. We need to double research funding for prostate cancer. You know, to make a difference, you know, to travel that last mile, the title of this webinar, to get that last mile, you know, to close the gaps, we need an increased investment in research of prostate cancer. Some of the stuff that's happening now is wonderful. It's like Star Wars, you know, nuclear medicine and molecules and all sorts of things. You know, it's just remarkable. Let's maintain the rage, so to speak, and let's get some research money into there to make sure that we cover this last mile as soon as possible. We also need to invest in targeted public awareness campaigns. Not enough Australians know enough about prostate cancer, about what it is, about what to do to protect yourself from it, about understanding your risks, and what to do if you want to try and talk to someone about it and when you should do that. We need to get a targeted education campaign out there to look at literacy when it comes to prostate cancer, but also making sure that we get the right messages to the right people about how to protect themselves from prostate cancer. And of course, those flow-on impacts that a diagnosis has for family members and friends. We need to push hard. A fourth priority for us is on the adoption of our prostate cancer survivorship essentials framework. Excuse me, Will. You can see I'm not as smooth at this as Will. Will's a professional every night. If you want to watch the news and get the lowdown, I'm a student of Will's. I'm doing better, hopefully, as I go on. Forgive the cough. We have developed and we have been endorsed by key organisations, medical and clinical and scientific and academic, a set of survivorship essentials for members with prostate cancer, which we know, if implemented, will improve quality of life. And it includes care coordination and access. So this too is something that's important for us. And look, you know what? We do need to do better at collecting data on staging and treatment and on survivorship outcomes. The more data we can collect, the better we can analyse that, the more informed we can make our decisions with the greater impact for each and every person out there. Because at the centre of it always for the PCFA is the agency of the patient. Looking after that person, a bit like that diagram that Trolls and Ian showed us. And like this one here, personal agency, the patient at the centre. Ultimately, at PCFA, our goal is to eliminate avoidable deaths within the next 10 years. It's a big call, but you know what? We can do this. Eliminate avoidable deaths. Get men diagnosed early. Make sure through sensible policy they have access to the sorts of treatments and medicines and technologies we know will make a difference. And we can eliminate avoidable deaths. There can be no doubt the National Medicines Policy has got an important role to play here. At PCFA, we were delighted to be a part of the consultation process, and we are looking forward to hearing at an appropriate time, Ian. I agree with you. Let's try and, as far as possible, maybe this is pie in the sky, keep the politics out of it and focus on the medicine and the evidence. But, at an appropriate time, let's hear of the outcomes and make sure that we can do something for men out there with prostate cancer and their families. Will, thank you for that.
No, Jeff, thank you so much. That pretty much is such a great emphasis on what we're trying to do, is look after patients, look after men, look after their families. And I know PCFA does it because I know I work with you guys and I am honoured to be able to be involved in an organisation. Sounds silly because I'm involved with it because I've got prostate cancer, but I would not rather if you guys weren't there, I just know that it wouldn't be the same for so many men dealing with this sort of stuff. I just want to touch on that point Jeff made as well, is that 15% of people diagnosed with stage 3 and 4. I'm a stage 4. I didn't quite know my risk. I was only 42, but I can tell you right now, there's not anyone who meets me that doesn't get their ear bashed about going to the doctor and getting a PSA test, because that solves the problem in so many cases. So yeah, they hear it from me a lot and I feel bad sometimes, but then I remember, it'll probably save someone's life. So I keep going. Jeff, thank you so much for that. That was, you've done so well. I appreciate it. Let's go to Sally Sara and get your perspective as PCFA's Director of Nursing Programs. How do you think we need to approach the challenges that are going on at the moment?
Well, thank you, Will. Can I start by just saying that I agree with all my fellow panellists today that we've got a lot of work to do in this space to get things right. It's instructive to consider the principles outlined in our nursing practice framework, our prostate cancer nursing framework, which describes the scope of prostate cancer specialist nursing, both at a clinical and strategic level, and it informs and influences practice at an advanced level. And as everyone here today knows, prostate cancer treatment involves a multimodal approach. It could be surgery, hormone deprivation therapy, radiation therapy, chemotherapy, surveillance programs. And the prostate cancer specialist nurse is involved in the care of men in all treatment stages and streams, and really is an integral part of the multidisciplinary healthcare team. So timely access to affordable medicines and new medicines is vitally important to the work we do, including the equitable promotion of survivorship outcomes for men. Over recent years, we've seen new medicines and therapies emerge that they no longer fit the definitions prescribed in the National Medicines Policy, which is really a wonderful indicator of how far we've come in a relatively short period of time. But it also tells us how much more responsive the policy itself needs to be to address the constantly changing landscape for prostate cancer treatment. And we really need the policy mechanisms that are designed to evolve and move with the times, supported by public funding and appropriate resourcing to ensure existing and emerging patient needs are being monitored and considered and factored into planning. So designing a health technology assessment framework that's flexible and fit for purpose is really, really important. So we can enable the expansion of the targeted therapies and precision medicine, allowing the breakthrough life-saving and life-prolonging medicines to be delivered to consumers more quickly. And in many ways, the existing National Medicines Policy has been a static document. We've not really seen dynamic and ongoing engagement in the policy delivery process, and this ultimately has placed limitations on its effectiveness. And I think all of us agree, really, the importance of basic and fundamental principles such as patient-consumer engagement, health literacy, personalised care, and it's imperative that the revised National Medicines Policy establishes measurable objectives around these principles. The outcome will be improved survivorship, reduced costs on the health system, and much greater community involvement and productivity. Nurses and specialist nurses were often the first to witness the distress that can arise when medicine policy fails patients. And we see families trying to source money to fund medicines and treatments proven to have a positive impact, but not yet funded publicly. And sometimes this means families are trying to pool money for a few more months of treatment. And sadly, sometimes we see men having to make the decision not to use precious funds because they worry they'll leave their families short of money once they're gone. And for them, survival really is placed out of reach, and many lose hope. So I really feel it's our duty to work as part of this review process, ultimately to try and restore faith and confidence in the process. And Will, I can only imagine that you've seen quite a bit of this firsthand as a patient and a consumer of our health system.
Sally, thank you. Sally Sarah, the Director of PCFA Nursing. Yeah, you're right, I have. I've spoken to so many people, and there is always a different journey with cancer. When I talk about my experience, I always say this is my cancer journey. Lots of people have a different one. But from my point of view, since I was diagnosed, it was all consuming. Like I kind of describe my life as being one before prostate cancer and my life now with prostate cancer, and they're very bloody different. I can tell you that right now. To start with, it was a whirlwind. I was diagnosed at 42 with an aggressive form of the disease that had already spread into my hip bone. So it was made pretty clear to me that I needed treatment and I needed it right now. There wasn't really a chance to muck around. So I simply had to trust my team of doctors. And I suppose this is where all this comes back into making sure all the policies and all the medicines that are available, because I didn't know. I trusted a bunch of people to save my life. Thankfully, they have so far, which is really good. And I didn't have any experience of cancer before this. My family's been really lucky. My dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer 6 months before me. He was 75. So his was very different. He caught it relatively early because of PSA testing. He had his out and he's fine. So my understanding was very little. I remember joking, and this is how rudimentary I was in my understanding of treatment and access to treatment and what I needed. I remember joking with my urologist about my planned chemotherapy, and I said to him, literally, turn the machine up to full blast and give me the maximum allowable human dosage. That's kind of where I was at in terms of understanding it. I know a lot more now, and I'm now fortunate to be able to reach out to experts. And I've done that recently, earlier this year, just to make sure that the treatment that I was getting, that was really quick, and I just had to accept to a certain level, to make sure that treatment was what I needed. And luckily it was the gold standard. So I was very fortunate in that regard. Look, you touched on this a moment ago, Sally. Men like me, we know that there's lots going on in terms of medical treatments. Lots is being developed. Research is happening all over Australia as we speak right now. We just want to make sure that the treatments that are available, the new drugs, are easily accessible and they're put into play as quickly as possible. It breaks it down to the layman's terms as much as I can. The thing I emphasise, and you just mentioned this, Sally, too, sorry, is that the size of our bank account or the prestige of our postcode shouldn't ever be a factor in whether or not we're going to get access to a treatment that is going to give us more time with our families. It's going to keep us alive, or if we miss out, and to put it bluntly, we're going to die. So that's where it really boils down to from a patient perspective, is that if you want to say red tape, it's red tape. That's what we want to see changed, removed, to make sure that if it's going to help, we can get it. My position, my point of view. With that, we are going to open up to a few questions from some of our people who are viewing with us today. I've got a whole list of them. So I'm going to start with, I'll start with first things first. This is one that came through as well, and I know we've been campaigning on this one. It is, what progress has been made in getting Medicare and health funding to pay a percentage of the PSMA PET scans? Is there anything we can say yet at the moment?
Well, if you like, I'm happy to pick that up. I mean, terrific question. And you're right, we have been campaigning on that. I mean, there's some good news. So the Commonwealth's Medical Scientific Advisory Committee has recommended that this does get picked up and funded by the Commonwealth. What we're doing now is waiting an outcome of that recommendation. It's in the machinations. I expect the best thing we can do at this stage is look to see what comes out in the budget, which is out in a couple of weeks. And we would be hopeful that on the basis of that recommendation, there is some relief when it comes to accessing that technology.
That is good news. Hopefully that follows through. I know I've dropped a couple of grand. Yeah. A couple of grand having those scans myself. So,
I know. I mean, that's a good case. That's a good example, isn't it? I mean, it's a very good example of exactly, access to technology. And anyway, the recommendation's in. Let's hope it comes out the other end really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Look, I'm in a relatively lucky position. I could afford to pay it when I had to, but it still hurts. It's a fair whack of cash for a lot of people. Anyway, there's good news there. I'll go to Ian and Trolls if I can. A good question. You referred to a couple of other countries in terms of what they're doing. How do we make Australia the best country in the world for access to new medicines? Is it possible to make Australia the best country in the world for access to new medicines?
Yes. Seriously, Australia is a rich country. We don't realise how rich we are. Our GDP's better than that of the UK. It's up there with Germany. It might even be better GDP per capita than Germany. Certainly, we're a wealthy country. We've got a good health system. these new health technologies, I call them, the new medicines and the new diagnostics, they answer our problems. They're very productive. It's a very productive way of producing health, new technology, if you think about it. These new technologies come down in price over time as well. By legislation, they come down in price. And then when patents are lost on them, they come down to a fraction of what their price was when they first come in. Now, if you think about, I don't want to put doctors and nurses and hospital buildings in the spotlight here, but all that is another way of producing health. That goes up every year. So new technology is actually the answer to our problems. So we've got to get stuff in as quickly as possible and start using it. Now, what happens in the UK and places like France and Germany, especially UK and France, they've just changed some of the way they think about health technology assessment. But as soon as the regulator says yes, they've got approaches to get these products into people immediately. Now, we're sweating on a PBAC decision tomorrow. We've got a cancer therapy. I won't go into the details, but the PBAC made a decision on this. We don't know what the decision is, and we're sweating on it tomorrow. We think it'll be rejected, and we know the reason it's going to be rejected. It's the provision of data, and we think it won't be on the PBS until 2024. I can tell you that the UK, with the same data, the same health technology assessment approach, patients in England can use it now. So there's a big difference. So the UK's got a very similar system to us and a very similar ethos to us in terms of evidence-based medicine and health technology assessment. But they found a way to make it available. They've got what's called a cancer drugs fund, and they can make things available immediately. And then real world evidence is collected, and in 2 years' time, they will have a relook at the data and they'll renegotiate price, or they'll renegotiate the deal with like an Amgen or another company. And that's being patient-centric. We can do the same, dead set.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, that was going to be my comment as well. I think it's more a mindset and a willingness to look for the right solutions for the patient. The German or the British or the French system doesn't necessarily become unsustainable or significantly more expensive because they make these changes. They've just, realized that there's a real need for real patients out there when it, in terms of access to medicines that they need, and found ways of making that happen for them. It's a mindset.
All right, well, it's good to know we can make it happen. We just need to make it happen. It's probably the next step. As you say, it's a mind step, make it happen. I'll go to Sally if I can just ask a question, which I think is really important from a patient's point of view too. Is what is it like, you touched on this I think too, what is it like for a patient who comes in to see one of the PCFA nurses when they can't afford that access to treatment like you were mentioning before? What sort of toll does that take from a personal level on your nurses, but also on the patients and their families as well?
Oh, it's very distressing for everybody, and rarely does the decision happen on the spot. So often it takes a little bit of time to understand what the options may be in terms of medicines, and that in itself requires a bit of a learning curve for the man and his family as well. You know, it's the descriptions are quite complicated. We were talking about jargon before, but there's plenty of jargon around the medication side of things, and you will watch people try and process it, and then they go away and talk amongst family. Sometimes nurses will get phone calls saying we're ringing around family to see if we can all chip in. But it's very distressing when particularly couples families come back and say we're not going to go down this path, and worrying about the man may be worried about how much time he has left and what money he'll leave behind, and I've seen that on numerous occasions. distressing for the nurses and also for the clinicians. You know, the medical staff are not immune to that either. Really important that we all stay abreast of the options for, you know, sometimes there can be clinical trials, sometimes there can be compassionate access schemes, and they change over time. So we really need to make sure we know what they are. But sometimes there just are no options other than paying for it. And that quite often is not an option.
Yeah, that does sound so distressing, Sally. Thank you for running us through exactly how it works. So, you know, at the coalface, so to speak, it's where the decisions are made, and they happen quite quickly sometimes. I'll go to Jeff if I can. The review of the current PSA guidelines, what kind of position are you taking? Where is that sitting at the moment? Has it officially changed? Is it going to officially change, that PSA guideline testing?
Well, thank you for the question. And can I just, before answering that, just reflect back very briefly on your previous question and Sally's response? And I mean, I don't want to lose the opportunity to acknowledge, you know, that a diagnosis of prostate cancer is a major life threat. And, you know, it has impacts way beyond the biological and physical sometimes, notwithstanding the terrible impost there. But, you know, Sally spoke about distress, and I just to point out, we have a policy, a position now on screening for distress in prostate cancer. All of our nurses, Sally has ensures that all of our nurses are trained in screening for distress. Our telephone-based nursing service also screens for distress anyone who contacts the service, because as we know, you know, sometimes what's going on in a person's life with a diagnosis of prostate cancer can overtake what happens in other parts of their life and develop into clinically significant sequelae symptoms, which need to be addressed. And we make it an important part of our service profile to do that. And the nurses, again, just do a fantastic job. About the guidelines, getting these guidelines reviewed, I've got to say to you, and let me just say again, to all the panelists and to everyone out there, is a priority for us for all the right reasons. I mean, we've had some great progress over the last 20, 30 years with regard to prostate cancer in Australia. Wonderful. And it's a testament to, you know, the quality of our health services, the quality of our, you know, doctors, nurses, allied health people, our systems, the medicines that are coming through, the treatments. But we can do better. And a secret to doing better is, you know, much of the answer is in the review of the guidelines. PCFA have been pushing, advocating, engaging, all of those things with government and with other stakeholders to try and get this guideline, the funding for this guideline review over the board. We are in play as we speak with the Commonwealth, with the department and with the ministerial officers. And we are hoping, that this budget, again, this is Ian, you're an economist. It's the second time, third time I've referred to the budget. Anyway, we are hoping that when this budget announcement comes out in, 2 weeks' time, that we'll be able to come back to all of our stakeholders with updates on where we are with regard to this development. Stick with us. And can I just say again, you know, we're not going to give this up. These guidelines do need to be reviewed. We believe that, you know, this next budget is going to be a key point in time in getting this done. But if it's not, we'll just try twice as hard. But hopefully we'll be out pretty soon with some advice to stakeholders.
That is tremendous news. Thanks very much, Jeff. There was a quick question to me as well, which was basically about, from a patient's perspective, what things can we do to support the involvement of listing new medicines? Well, I can tell you firsthand, from a patient's perspective, is make sure you get in touch with the PCFA, follow them on Facebook and all the social medias and your newsletter and stuff like that, because I've filled out the submissions as a patient that goes towards things like the PSMA PET scan being listed. It's us, it's the patients. The harder we push, the more people are out there demanding that politicians and bureaucrats change things. This is the best chance we get, led wonderfully by, you know, the PCFA and other people at Amgen and the like. I will now wrap up questions. It's been a great discussion there, but what I will ask is for each of our panelists, maybe just to share one final thought with the audience based on what we've been talking about today. And I'll dob in Jeff to go first. But you're on mute.
Actually, lucky I was on mute with that outburst, Will. Anyway, look, so again, terrific discussion. You know what I'd like to just pick up on, and it's just something you said, Will. Let's not be talking, about patients and how we're going to help them. I mean, it's about what can individuals, what can each and every one of us do? What's our role to play? And I've got to say to you, and never a truer word has been said. If myself or Anne Savage or the national chair of PCFA go and represent ourselves at the Commonwealth, asking for change, they're not listening to us. They don't give time because it's me. It's because we're representing patients out there. PCFA is representing thousands upon thousands of men and their families, family members who have been facing prostate cancer, and it's the patient voice which needs to be listened to, needs to be loud, and needs to be clear. And your call to arms, so to speak, will just then to patients out there to get involved where they can. Look at our websites, talk to others, engage others in conversation. Each and every action that you take makes a difference. Each and every action will help all of us collectively deliver on better outcomes for men with prostate cancer. So there's a role for each and every one of us. That's for sure and for certain.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Jeff. Thank you so much for being on the panel today. I'll hand over to whoever wants to maybe jump in with a final thought.
I'm happy to jump in, Will, and follow along behind Jeff. As Jeff has said, being diagnosed with prostate cancer is a major life stress, and we've covered quite a bit of ground today. And whilst the focus has been on medicines, it's notwithstanding the fact that there are many, many challenges for men and families who are dealing with prostate cancer. And I just want to plug our tele-nursing service, if I may. We have prostate cancer specialist nurses who are trained and on the phones Monday to Friday. For anyone impacted by prostate cancer, please ring through if you have a question or a concern, or you want to talk to someone, 1800 22 0099.
Yeah, a very good plug. Thank you, Sally, Sarah, as well. That's such a good reminder for everyone to help out. Trolls, I think you might have had something you wanted to say just as you were battling Sally for the floor.
Yeah, no. So, both what you said, Will, and what Jeff said really resonated with me. Patients increasingly are the ones defining both the care pathway, but also what happens in healthcare policy. The more patients we are getting involved in shaping the environment that sits around patient care, the better off specific disease states, including prostate cancer, will be off. So I can only encourage patient engagement and getting involved. It's a right path to go down.
Thanks very much, Trolls. And Ian?
I echo all of those points. I think we can't just be bystanders in the system. The system needs to change. I think the government and health technology assessment bodies like PBAC and MSAC find it difficult to factor in the patient lived experience with all the other evidence. I think they've got to do better, really, to factor it all in. I have seen the department trying really hard to do it, but we've got to help them by being enthusiastic and by being in people's faces. People have got a right to get treated in this country quickly, and leave all the argy-bargy and all the red tape to the industry and the department. We should be handling that separately. Patients should be getting their treatment really quickly, as soon as they're made available through the TGA.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly concur with that one as well, Ian. Thank you. Well, I just will make a final point as well. I guess it's the idea of never losing hope. I always say when I was diagnosed, I felt alone, like seriously alone, like I'd never felt before in my life. But you're not. You're really not alone. Get involved with the PCFA, seek support, and then offer it to other men who may be facing the same thing as well. The PCFA and their cancer specialist nurses, they are wonderful. Just simply being able to ask questions about the little worries. I know it made such a difference to my mental health and fears that crop up in the depths of night when you're lying there thinking, well, what's going to happen next? I guess the idea is that the moment that you want to start looking for love and support, you'll find that there's so much out there for you. So please reach out if you do need that help. And just finally, I'll hand over to Jeff Dunn for a final thanks and goodbye.
Hey, thanks, Will. As always, what a well-run webinar, don't you reckon? Seamless. To Ian and Trolls, listen, to you and your colleagues at Amgen, thank you. You know, what terrific partners we've got, you know, as we work together to try and bring about change. And we need to be in lockstep with industry, to work with industry, to make sure that we all want the same thing. We come about it from different angles, but we do want improved outcomes for patients. So thank you for your observations today. And thank you for being such good and strong and steadfast partners for PCFA as we work to make the world a better place. We do appreciate it. And again, terrific jargon-free stuff this afternoon. From an economist and a medico, dearie me, that was fantastic. Do you know, nothing. I actually love working with PCFA. I think it's a terrific place. And can you imagine how lucky I am to wake up every day and know I'll be working with someone as sensational as Sally Sarah and the nursing team? Seriously, these people are outstanding. Sally as an individual is just the best. And she leads a team of, as Will said earlier on, over 100 nurses around the country who are making the lives of men diagnosed with prostate cancer better each and every day. Sally, it's always terrific to join with you in any forum, and it just continues to remind me about how good you are at what you do and how much of yourself personally you invest in this role. It's terrific stuff. So thank you, Sal. And of course, Will McDonald, Will's my mentor now in so many ways. Seriously, we met this bloke. It's like I've known Will for 400 years. He's just, well, it couldn't be. He's only a teenager, but you know what I mean. Will's just wonderful. And the fact that PCFA, we've managed to attract Will. He's joined with us. He's an ambassador, a champion for us now. I've got to say to you, in terms of getting the message out there, there's no one better. And Will, without word of a lie, you're making a difference, my friend, and we thank you for it very much. And you know, we're with you all the way, and we thank you for being with us. And I suppose just finally then to everyone out there who's joined in this webinar, how good is it to know that you're out there, you're interested. PCFA has got something to offer for you. Take, if you can, the advice of some of our speakers today and looking for a role and opportunity to play a part. Thank you, everyone.